Chapter 18, guys. We started last week a little bit and then kept going a little bit today in class. And I'm going to do a series. Hopefully, I can get this done in 3 videos. I'm going to try to squeeze it into 2, but I want to make sure I hit the main points for you guys to review. So, first thing in this chapter, case study on South Asia's massive brown clouds. This is just a couple of points here. You got 2 countries in India and China that are developing pretty rapidly, so they're relying pretty heavily on coal. Middle class is growing, so you've got a lot of vehicles. And the biggest thing with this, I think, is that air pollution doesn't stay put. So in addition to 2 places that are really starting to develop, they are also producing pollutants that can travel and affect places far away. This little satellite image is in your textbook. The layers of the atmosphere. Remember, the 2 that we need to be most familiar with are the troposphere and the stratosphere. These are basic descriptions, but troposphere is where life is found. It's where we are. It's the closest layer to the ground. It's also the thinnest layer in terms of height. The stratosphere contains the protective ozone layer. That's the one significant thing to remember about that layer. Atmosphere, thin blanket of gases that surround the Earth. Gravity basically forces most of that air mass and those molecules down towards the surface, which allows us to be able to breathe. You do need to remember for the test these layers in order from the surface of the Earth. So troposphere, stratosphere, mesosphere, thermosphere, and pretty much what divides those up is pressure and then changes in temperature. The protective ozone layer is found just above the troposphere. It's right in the beginnings of the stratospheric layer. Now, basic description of the troposphere. Again, this is the area where we live in. 75 to 80% of the Earth's air mass is found in this area. And another big thing to remember is the composition of gases, with 99% of those gases being nitrogen and oxygen. So a lot of those other things in the atmosphere that we talk about, especially with regards to pollution, climate change like carbon dioxide, they exist in a small percentage compared to these 2 gases. For the stratosphere, later on we'll talk about specifically about the ozone layer, but basically the chemical composition is roughly the same. Biggest difference is you have ozone in this particular layer, O3, that filters out much of the harmful UV radiation. Without the ozone layer, life would not exist. One thing to note, the chemical symbol is O3 for ozone. The oxygen that we breathe is O2. Ozone can also exist in the troposphere, but it is a pollutant, a secondary pollutant, when it's in the troposphere. Okay, so in the stratosphere, it's good, it protects us. In the troposphere, it is a pollutant. All right, so what is pollution? Okay, or what are the major outdoor pollution problems? Basically, the book breaks it up into burning of coal and burning of petroleum products, mainly by vehicles. Those are kind of the 2 big categories. Again, what used to be called gray and brown smog are now called industrial smog and photochemical smog. Air pollution, concentrations high enough of any sort of chemical to cause problems in humans. Some of those things can actually be natural, and not necessarily just us. It can be other organisms, structures, ecosystems, those type of things. Some of the natural sources are here. Human sources, again, we're mainly focusing on fixed or stationary sources and mobile sources, which is going to be vehicles. Stationary power plants, industrial facilities, mostly those that burn coal, are the ones we're looking at, and these are going to typically be found in either industrialized areas or urban areas and parts that are developing. All right, primary versus secondary. So today you guys got a little handout that showed you the various outdoor air pollutants on the front. There's a data table. It showed you whether things were a primary or a secondary pollutant. For the test, good to be familiar with those. I don't know that I asked you any of those specifically. But those are things in the long run that you want to be familiar with. So the difference is primary come directly out of the source of the fuel when it is burned, whereas secondary are things that they come from a primary source, but they go through a chemical reaction, so they change to something different in the atmosphere. And then this gives you some examples. So these are all things that are emitted directly into the atmosphere when we burn coal or we burn any sort of petroleum product, for example, gasoline or diesel fuel. So you get a lot of what are considered primary pollutants. These guys are all things that result from these. So whether they're combining with water, say in the case of sulfuric acid, whether they're creating ozone, okay, which you have nitrogen oxides and volatile organic compounds, which are not on here, but also are one of the precursors to ground level ozone. You're getting some sort of change in the atmosphere. So these are not things that are directly emitted as a result of combustion. All right, so what are the major outdoor air pollutants? Criteria pollutants, I designated on your little handout today, the 6 criteria pollutants. Make sure you know those. Carbon monoxide is one of those. Nitrogen oxides are a second. Carbon dioxide is not a criteria pollutant, and it took a little while for it to really be recognized as a pollutant. And still, I think it's more referred to as a greenhouse gas, and one of the most studied and tracked with regards to the whole global warming, climate change debate. So that's one thing to keep in mind with that one. Nitrogen oxides, we'll talk a little bit about acid deposition later. Really, sulfur dioxides are one of the main contributors to this, but nitrogen oxides can as well. Nitrogen oxides, they're a bigger problem when it comes to photochemical smog, where you're getting reactions with light or UV radiation that's changing these nitrogen oxides into different harmful compounds, with ozone, ground level ozone being one of those. Sulfur dioxide is a third criteria pollutant. It's also a precursor to a secondary pollutant, or sulfuric acid. This one is more commonly an issue when it comes to when we talk about acid deposition or acid rain. A lot of times we're looking at this. Particulate matter is divided up into different categories based on its size. So there's smaller particulates, PM2.5. You have larger up to like PM10. And this is things like smoke, soot, ash. This is also a criteria pollutant. Ozone is a 5th criteria pollutant, and it is only a secondary pollutant. So it forms in the atmosphere afterwards from nitrogen oxides, and then these guys down here, certain volatile organic compounds can form ozone. Volatile organic compounds are not a criteria pollutant. Methane is one example of those, and volatile is a hint in that they're highly reactive. They cause problems with, basically, they are precursors to a lot of the secondary pollutants, even though methane is primary pollutant. Table of reactions, I cut this out of your guys' notes just because this isn't something we're real concerned with right now, but this is just showing you during the process of combustion, these are some of the things that form and how they form. Lead is the 6th criteria pollutant. Lead is emitted through the combustion mainly of coal, but also petroleum products. So you're getting a lot of lead that through the process of combustion is emitted into the atmosphere. And lead can be a problem if it's inhaled. Lead can also be a problem if it gets into waterways or soils, that type of stuff. Most vulnerable to lead impacts are children, and infants and toddlers in particular, and possibly fetus embryo, because they are still developing. And so this kind of gets in the way of that development or can hinder it depending on toxicity levels. All right, 2 types of smog, or 2 major types of smog. Industrial, which is a result of burning of coal. These are some of the main pollutants from it, from the burning of those fossil fuels. I'm going to skip through that for now. And then you have your photochemical smog, which is a result of vehicles burning gasoline. So you're getting kind of 2 different sets of products from those things being burned, both causing different problems. These, you get a lot of secondary pollutants. On to the next video.